So, I asked you guys what y'all are most looking forward to in patch 2.4, and more than half of you guys mentioned the rerun banners. So today, let's talk about the pros and cons of the characters on these rerun banners. Before we dive right in, I just want to make a disclaimer, these are just my opinions, and of course, at the time of writing this video, we still don't know the 4-star characters on these banners, so that will also affect the decision somewhat. But today, let's focus on just the 5-star characters. Now with that out of the way, we can finally talk about Xiao. Xiao is the first banner on the patch, running together with Shenhe, and besides Yunjing, we don't know what the other 4-stars are just yet. Now, normally, Xiao is an easy recommend for me because I really like his playstyle and his damage isn't bad as well, but I can't recommend pulling on Xiao this patch, and I'll explain why. But first, let's talk about his pros. He's a strong Anemo DPS that does big AoE damage and really fun to use. He's definitely one of the better DPS units out there if you can fully optimize for him, which is the bad part. He's kind of selfish as a DPS, and you need to build around his lack of energy recharge, and because this Yaksha is a little suicidal on his burst, you have to pair him up with a healer. A good pairing would probably be Jean, who will both be able to heal and be a battery for Xiao. Like I said, Xiao is an easy recommendation from me if you really like his playstyle, but the biggest thing about his banner is that it's immediately followed up by Zhongli and Ganyu, two of the most popular units in the game, and for good reason, which I'll cover later in the video. So I cannot recommend pulling for Xiao this patch unless you already have the other two characters or just really enjoy his playstyle. Next, let's talk about Zhongli. The Geo Archon has been a staple of many team comps and is one of the most used units in the Abyss even till this day. With Zhongli, you can basically enjoy the game stress-free. He makes the game so much easier by the amount of perks he offers. An uber tanky shield that has a low cooldown that you can cycle to protect your other characters. Elemental and physical resist shred onset shield, which basically makes him viable in 90% of team comps. Also, he deals off-field damage, although I should say it's not a whole lot, but it also generates energy, though that is more for mono-geo teams. His ult also allows you to immobilize smaller enemies, and it covers a huge AoE. To top it all off, all his skills scale with HP, so his damage won't even be that bad should you decide to go all HP on him. The only thing that counters him right now are enemies that can ignore his shield and deal damage, but let's face it, he's still pretty busted even with corrosion, and I don't expect that to change with the addition of the new Pyro Herald thing that we're getting. With how broken he is, Zhongli is definitely my top recommendation for patch 2.4, and if you don't have him, do yourself a favor and try to pull for him. Lastly, let's move on to Ganyu. Touted as one of the best DPS units in the game, it's hard for me not to recommend Ganyu, though I should say I don't use her much because I find her playstyle generally boring, but that's a personal problem of mine, so just take that however you will. Her damage mainly comes from firing off charge shots, and the bulk of her damage is from the bloom that you get with level 2 charge shots, so you don't even have to aim that properly, and you can just fire it at the general vicinity of the monsters to get most of the damage off. The multipliers are also pretty insane on her, but you'll have to excuse my lack of skill and damage on her showcase because, as I've said, I am not a fan of her playstyle. Also, with her being a cryo character, as compared to the other two that we talked about previously, you can further amp her damage with melt should you decide to, or with a hydro unit, you can have the ability to freeze monsters, which is always a nice option to have. As for her skills itself, they're pretty basic. Her elemental skill helps her get out of range of enemies, while her burst allows her to cover a huge AoE, which I've found to be pretty useful. I should also mention that unlike Xiao, she doesn't try to kill herself, and having supports are a bonus for her and not a necessity like with Xiao, so it gives you some room to play around with your team comps. Overall, she's the easier recommendation for me to make over Xiao, which requires too much care and protection from teammates, and she's easier to play as well, so I would prioritize her over Xiao. In conclusion, If I don't own any of these characters, I would absolutely pick Zhongli because of just how much utility he offers, but if you really need a DPS or already have Zhongli, I think Ganyu is the easier pick, and I would only recommend pulling for Xiao if you really like him, at least for this patch, because Xiao is pretty much overshadowed by the two other rerun units. With that, I hope this video has helped you make a clearer decision, and if you've enjoyed, make sure you leave a like and a subscribe would be awesome. That's gonna be it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace!